which I remember doing the last time I ironed.
All right, it's September 21st today,
Yes.
and let's
Of
start
what year?
of 2013. So both of you, give me your full name, and why did your parents select this name for you, and let me know if you have a nickname.
Okay. My name is Lorraine L, and my parents selected the name because there was an aunt who died in the late teens from the flu, and I was named after her. And my nickname was my Yiddish name, which is Libby, Libby, which to this day a lot of my relatives and friends still call me that.
My name is Bernard J. Lerner. I was named after a grandfather whose name was Beryl, so my name was Bernard. And I was born on September 19th, 1929. I just celebrated my 84th birthday 3 days ago. And my nickname, as you can see from the color of my hair, was Whitey, and people still call me Whitey.
And you were both born in New York.
No,
Yes.
I was born in Newark, New Jersey.
Okay, sorry. And you were born in New York.
In New York City, in the Bronx.
Okay, so tell me how, let's start with you, Dad. How did your family come to the United States and, approximate years and everything else?
My father's parents came from a small town outside of Odessa, which is in the Ukraine. They came here in the mid-1890s looking for a better opportunity. They left their families. Who came here were my grandparents and all of their children. My mother arrived just before 1900. She was the youngest of 5 children, and the last to arrive. They all traveled from Romania in groups as they can afford it. My mother's father was German, emigrated to Romania to be a teacher, and decided when they left Romania to come to the U.S. My grandfather came here and expecting to find gold in the streets was very disappointed and died very, very early in life.
Did your aunts all come to the U.S. also?
Yes, my aunts, my uncles, all of the children of my parents arrived here.
Did they all settle into New York?
They all settled on the Lower East Side of New York. My grandfather was a butcher, and my father became a butcher. As a result of a trade accident, he lost his left thumb, which made him ineligible to be in the Army in World War I.
Gotcha. And Mom, how did your parents come to the
We
U.S.?
have a longer story.
Let's keep it brief.
I'll try to be. My mother's mother was a widow with a 7-year-old child. And she, as was the custom in Poland those days, if you became a widow, you married a man who was a widower. My grandfather was 19 years older than my grandmother. They came to the United States through Ellis Island, and when they stopped there, my grandmother's child was not allowed to come into the country because he had an eye infection, and so he was put on the ship to take him back to Poland. He never was found again. She, to the day she died, cried about that. Although she and my grandfather had 4 children, my mother first, and then 3 sons. My father's family, my father was what we would call a travel agent. He took people in Poland into Germany, where he put them on ships to come to the United States, again to Ellis Island. Shortly thereafter, my father's younger brothers and sister came to the country. My father came in under the auspices of a brother of my grandfather who was a baker in Philadelphia. My father, when he arrived in the United States, was drafted and served in World War I with the American Army, and then, of course, came back.
Tell me about, let's start with you, Dad. Tell me about your, the kind of apartment or home that you lived in when you were, a kid.
When we were young, we lived in two different apartments. One in the East Bronx, and then one, which was, well, technically the East Bronx was east of the Grand Concourse, so we always considered ourselves living on the west side. The apartment house that I really grew up in was quite a nice building. We had a doorman, we had a private bus service, and the bus used to take me off to public school. It was a two-bedroom, very nice apartment across the street from a park. So the living conditions for us were quite well. Even though a lot of people were hurting from the tail end of the recession, we did pretty well.
And you?
My father worked as what is known as an operator in the garment center, making women's raincoats and robes. That was not exactly what you would consider a lot of money type of job. So we lived in the East Bronx. We lived on the third floor of a walk-in apartment building, but I never thought of myself as being, quote, poor, because everybody I knew was in the same situation.
Did your apartments, you had electricity and telephones?
We had a dishwasher, not a dishwasher, we had a refrigerator and the usual things found in an apartment.
Yeah. What kind of games did you guys play when you were kids?
When I came home from school, I would meet some friends and we would jump rope, or we would play potsy, or other games which required something being written on the sidewalk and then jumping. So we got an awful lot of exercise without realizing it.
I grew up with a large number of friends, and we had a club called the Comets. We excelled in football, and we played in a Bronx Parks Department contest, and we ended up winning the Bronx title. So we played a lot of football. That was our favorite sport. I also excelled in roller hockey, which was the sport that I really enjoyed. Basketball I wasn't particularly good in, but like most kids, most boys, we played stickball and volleyball and especially softball and football.
And threw snowballs at girls as they walked by.
Who were some of your childhood heroes and movie actors and musicians that you liked?
Oh, we can start with a lot of people in the 30s. My favorites were Alice Faye, and then Betty Grable as girls, and John Payne, who also was a 20th Century Fox star, and then Jerome Powell.
I guess my favorites were, like lots of boys, Errol Flynn and Gary Cooper. I particularly liked Westerns, and to this day I love Randolph Scott as my favorite cowboy. The other movie stars that I liked were the redhead who played in a lot of the pirate movies.
You said Errol Flynn.
And with Errol Flynn. Olivia de Havilland was one of my favorite actresses.
What kind of music?
The big bands, I liked Harry James, Jim Krupa, the one, I can't remember his name now, who died during World War II. You can't think of him either.
Not Tommy Dorsey.
Benny Goodman?
No, not Benny Goodman. The one who, he was the biggest band in the country, and he was traveling to Europe in a plane during the tail end of the war and got killed.
The plane never showed up.
Tex Beneke continued his music and took over as the bandstand.
Being 84 years old, you have to forgive us for not remembering names.
Right.
But
We'll come back. But I love Frank Sinatra.
Right.
Helen O'Connell was my favorite singer.
What was your typical family dinner like? What kind of food did you eat?
We would eat steak with a baked potato and a vegetable. There was always chicken soup on Friday night, salads on occasion, and dairy products if company was coming to the house. Somebody would go down to what was known as the appetizing store and buy all kinds of things that were prepared there and bring them up to the house. So there was very little cooking when company was coming, which we look forward to, by the way.
Having a father for a butcher, I grew up on meat with almost every meal short of breakfast. The interesting thing is, which kids don't do now, was I always had coffee in the morning with my breakfast.
So did I.
And the meal that I probably disliked the most was Friday night's chicken soup with boiled chicken. Today I enjoy it. As a kid, I disliked it. But beef was our mainstay for food.
What world events had the most impact on you while you were growing up? Did any of them personally affect your family?
World War II. I remember that Sunday very well. I had a cold. I was lying on a couch in the living room with the radio on, and it was announced that we had been bombed by the Japanese. It's something I still remember to this day.
So that was 41. You were born in 29.
Yeah,
So you were 12 years old.
right.
Yeah.
I remember December 7th, and we were all young kids. And the thing that we all talked about as young kids, the Japanese were not thought of very highly. Japanese products were always considered inferior to American, and we figured in a short period of time, we would really beat the hell out of them.
We didn't.
The other thing that impacted my family was my brother, who was 4 years older than me, went into the Navy in 1942 and saw combat in the Pacific. So that was probably the biggest impact of my life growing up. And then, of course, along came